Welcome back to the Disciplined Troublemakers podcast. I'm your host, Scott Shigori. Here on DT, we talk about scaling great tech companies and helping CEOs do that with greater ease and flow. Today, we'll be talking with Pam Prior. Pam is the CFO and coach to entrepreneurs, owner of a bookkeeping and a fractional CFO company, best-selling author, and a podcast host. Pam is a CFO with over 30 years of experience supporting bootstrapped entrepreneurs, private equity investors, Fortune 500 companies, and a few social media influencers and pro athletes. She's known for delivering clear and sensible financial information wrapped in humor. Pam often describes herself as a finance friend and a foxhole to 21st century entrepreneurs. Today we'll be talking with Pam about how bootstrapped and funded tech CEOs should think about their financial storytelling and how to fix things if they are a mess. Pam, thank you for carving out time to talk with us today, and welcome to the Disciplined Troublemakers podcast.
You bet. Anytime I can be somewhere with the word troublemakers, Scott, you know I'm in.
Well, thank you. Well, I think maybe to go ahead and kind of kick this off here, there's been, at least in my feeds and things like that, a lot of entrepreneurs, both bootstrapped as well as those who've been funded and either receiving funding or having some challenges around funding if they're outside of AI and a few other things. What is it as a CFO, or from your perspective, because you've seen all of it, what is the most important either reason or set of reasons for having a company's financials in order?
Yeah, so the underlying best reason, in my opinion, is that in the numbers, if it's done correctly and managed correctly and kept up to date, is the story of your business. And by having the numbers accurately reflect the story of your business, which they do by default, right? There's no way you can hide from that. What comes in and out of your bank account is in those numbers. But if we can lift that story out with good bookkeeping and good, advice, then that becomes the thing that says that you look at as an entrepreneur and go, okay, yeah, I see this lever that I pull, it moves that needle. I see when I made this decision, it had that impact. So that you can start to evaluate some of the things that we were talking about kind of before the show, Scott. If I'm investing in ads, am I seeing the return on that? And how long does it take to see the return on that? If I increase that spend, what happens? Those numbers, even though all you see is a bank statement, properly managed, those numbers tell that whole story and become the platform for really much better decision making, and not even necessarily better, because I've noticed that entrepreneurs' guts are always pretty accurate. They know when they're in trouble, they know when they're doing well. But what it does do is give them confidence in that gut answer. And if there's some major issue, which does happen occasionally, like fraud or waste or profit, you're not profitable in what you're selling. Yeah. Those things can tend to get overlooked, and you can die death from 1,000 cuts. Whereas if you're looking at these numbers and in a way where they're actually telling the story, you can avoid that. So that's kind of the most important for me, because that's the foundation for all of the other things that I think entrepreneurs recognize as the need. Well, I need to know them so that I can start up. I need to know how much money to ask for. I need to know how much money to invest, how much I need to borrow. I want to exit, and I need to know what my business is worth. So all of those questions kind of lie on top of the fact that just having your hands around that story and the numbers sets you up for all of those decisions.
Yeah, no, I can't argue with that. I guess the piece that surprises me sometimes is hearing stories either offline or occasionally people will share them, obviously, on social media, usually after the fact and after they fixed it, where, yeah, they've just had numbers that were an absolute mess. I mean, even funded founders who have gone through a seed or pre-seed, they've done their round A, and it's like, well, I'll worry about the numbers or my financial storytelling
when we get
the Series
there.
B round. Yeah, particularly the Series B round, which is what you kind of hear about, at least in the funded space. Yeah. And
I get calls a lot at that point. It's like, we're ready to do Series A, but we haven't paid attention to our books since the seed run. Can you get us ready? Mm-hmm. And that's a high cost project, right? And it doesn't need to be. It's, you very simply could hire your $500 a month bookkeeper on day one and not have to pay $30,000 or $40,000 to get your books in order so you can do a seed run that'll pass the legal sniff test.
Yeah, and I was going to ask that. What is, because obviously there are various markers which
It depends.
precede and
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean,
It depends. Yeah,
there
and
are
it's
$5,000 cleanup projects. There are, $100,000 cleanup projects. It really depends on how long, how deep, and how complex the time has been since, kind of it hasn't been paid attention to.
Yeah, no, it is a reminder that there is no free lunch, and that if you can do it now or you can do it later, and it's expensive to do it later, and it's your reputation online on top of everything else. So
right, and I think the reason that I feel like we all hear that, right? Exercise now, you'll be healthy later, etc. I mean, all very true, but in this particular case, there's no argument with the fact that without understanding your money, you're not going to be able to do anything with your business. Grow it, fund it, sell it, do any hire in it, those kind of things comfortably. And that gray cloud of discomfort, even though, one of the things I've learned in talking to thousands of entrepreneurs is that gray cloud is there for almost all of them. In fact, it is there for all of them who don't have something like this in place. Because in every sales call you make, in every podcast you do, in every family interaction you have, there's this little gray cloud hanging over your head of, I don't know if this is going to come and bite me or not. And if it does, it's going to be big. So even though we don't necessarily feel it, it's definitely there. And the minute each one of these folks that I've worked with have kind of had that veil lift, and they know they can look at this with certainty and go, oh, that's what's going to be happening, everything changes. It's like all of those mindset things go away that keep you constrained to a limited growth in your business.
Yeah, no, it's so true. In so many ways, we kind of push it to the side or figure I'll deal with it tomorrow. Whatever it is. In this case, well, obviously, we're talking about finances and money, but it just is so impactful, particularly when that cloud lifts, or you just have clarity. You've got discernment into the future, and can make clear decisions and use it as a lever for growth or whatever you might want to.
Yeah, I often tell people to meditate for a second and feel what that would feel like. Because once you feel it, if you can even get yourself to feel that non-fearful or non-gray cloud feeling for a second, you want more of it. And that's made a big difference for a lot of folks that I've talked to, just, kind of in the hallways at events and that kind of thing. It's just, I kind of sit them down and walk them through a mental exercise. And once you can't imagine that feeling of freedom until you actually really sit down and spend a minute with what it might be like.
Yeah, it's a great way to reframe, future pace them, and envision something that is within their control emotionally, because you can go ahead and create that. I'm someone who does an in-person meditation 3 days a week currently, and I've been doing it for a couple of years. And yes, it's incredibly powerful.
Absolutely.
There's no downside to it. It's just something that you can do and enjoy, but also, it just kind of radically transforms what you think is actually possible, which is, right, I think, fantastic.
And the very worst case, like you said, it's some time to yourself.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's true. So as my audience is a mixture of bootstrapped founders and those who have taken on some measure of funding, whatever that level might be. For the bootstrappers, how should CEOs balance investing for scale versus ensuring for profitability? Because as you know, they can't just focus on a burn rate. They can't just go to the till for a second helping in any way. But there is a balance there, and obviously there's the rules of 40. There's a bunch of them. But from your perspective, what do you think that balance or ways of thinking about it should be?
Yeah, and I hate this answer, right? But it is true, and I'm going to clarify it. It varies, okay? Yep. So at startup, you pretty much know you may choose to be unprofitable in a few things so that you can, really it's marketing spend, if you think about it. I'm going to go out there and do a speech for half my normal speech cost because I just want to get my name out there. Or I'm going to be offering this package that's going to be $5,000 down the road, but it's in beta right now, so I'm going to do $2,500. I may lose a little money on it. I'm going to throw an event, may lose a little money on it. So early on, it's a much heavier weighting towards getting things off the ground, getting your name out there, getting yourself rolling until you get some momentum. And then what you see is that as the momentum picks up, that percentage starts to swing a little bit the other way. So you want to first, after that first run of just, hey, I got to create the business here. Once you've created and you're starting to make some motion, you want to, then your next goal is, okay, I want to be break even and profitable now. But there's another piece to this. You don't just want to be profitable, you want to have cash flow too. You can be profitable and still have negative cash flow. Yep. Long story about how that can happen, but you can. So you need to make sure that you're getting the cash in the bank before you start thinking about investing. So once you start to see that cash balance start to build a little bit, which is what we all want in our businesses, right? More in than out, is then you've got the option to decide, okay, and it's not just really invest in the company versus be profitable. It's invest in the company versus pay myself and invest it elsewhere, be it in lifestyle, be it in real estate, be it in whatever you're doing to spend your money. And those become very personal decisions, and that's why it varies. So if I have this business and all of a sudden I'm sitting on some cash, I have the option of growing my business or putting it somewhere else. And this is what's so important for people to understand once they start making money. Number one is you definitely have to tax plan. And there are tax answers to where that money should go. But the second is, do you want all your eggs to stay in your business basket, which is probably your highest risk basket of investment, right? Or do you want to start now diversifying a little bit, get something into a 401k, get something into some hard real estate? Those sorts of things. So it really does vary. The thing that I would say is so important is you always want to have an understanding of your cash flow, which is just having a bookkeeper and knowing your numbers, and a little bit of a forecast. So that if you understand that if I spend this money to hire somebody, I can expect this much more in revenue after however long, 3 months, 6 months, 2 weeks. Yeah. You need to understand those so that you can really make an intelligent decision about, hey, I'm going to leave it all in this basket because I'm getting a 50% ROI on every dollar I spend. I'm getting a 50-cent return on every dollar that I spend here. So I'm young. I don't need to be diversified. I'm going to put it all in right here. Pay people more, attract better talent, market more, those kind of things.
Yeah. No, I think it is very much to your point, particularly for bootstrappers, and depending on what they want to do, some will obviously be very optimized around some form of big exit. Whether that's because they genuinely need that, or because it's an ego-based desire on their part, or whatever that
or
might
part of
like.
their overall portfolio strategy.
Yep. Or it's going to be, hey, I'd like to throw off more cash so I can invest in apartment complexes, or maybe it's cold storage, or whatever that story happened, it might be, or, of course, Bitcoin, or things of that nature, depending on a level of interest.
Yeah, I just look around the room that we were both in a little bit ago in Los Angeles, and every single one of those 20 people or so had a different sort of allocation of what they do, and it really depends on where they are in their life cycle, in the business life cycle. But the ground rule on all of it is to do whatever you choose to do. You've got to know those numbers. You've got to understand them, and you've got to understand how what you do in your business affects them lever by lever. And that's really what we're out to do.
Yep. Nope. It's very, very sensible there. How can, along similar lines here, how can CEOs ensure their pricing model supports both growth and long-term profitability? Because that's, I think, something that, while it gets a lot of attention, pricing models and support, I don't think it's always as well understood, particularly when you're either bootstrapped, you're doing $1 million, $1.5 million, $2, $3, whatever it might be, or something where, again, it might be a social media influencer. Kind of views on that.
Yeah, so again, I'm not going to answer that it varies because I hate that answer. So I'm going to talk in the two absolutes, okay? So there's the absolute of a commodity-based business, and there's the absolute of a high-value, high-touch business. So let's talk about those two differently. Sure. In a commodity business, you're going to be competing on price. You're going to be competing with competitors on price. So you're, by definition, deciding that you're going to have a low margin. So, for example, I have some clients who are 7-figure revenue, but they are 1 or 2% net income. Totally fine as a business model. Like it runs itself. Like it's very passive, right? So, makes a lot of sense. and the pricing is right. If they raise their prices, they'd lose the business, period. Now, in those businesses, the one thing you don't want to do, excuse me, is get caught in a price spiral to the bottom. And those kind of clients, thinking of some folks I've had that manufacture things like barbecue sauce or things to go in for distribution, say in Walmart. And Walmart will beat you to the bottom on your price. They will pound. So in that case, sure, you can maybe play with your price a little bit, but there's a huge caveat. And that huge caveat is do not let Walmart become your biggest customer. Okay?
Oh, yes. No, there are lots and lots of stories around that. They pay cash, or perhaps they still do, but otherwise, yeah.
Bingo.
Absolutely.
So you got to make sure that you're making more than you're spending. And, you might choose to have a chunk of Walmart because it gets your name out there and you're losing a little bit of money on 20% of your business, or you're, making lousy margin on 20% of your business. But the other 80, you want to have a whole different set of clients where you're competing with the rest of the normal world. So that's the one thing. But the other is the high value one. And the high value one, I have an exercise which I just suggest everybody does. And what I do is, a lot of what people do, let me start with what people normally do, is they go, okay, I've put X hours into this, X amount of materials, or Y amount of materials, and Z amount of paying contractors. Therefore, let's just pretend here, my total spend to be able to offer you my coaching, let's say, is $1,000. Okay? And they'll go, okay, I'll price it at $1,500 because I make 50%. But you're not going to get a lot of clients in this space because it's that coaching space that's very niche and you're looking for a very particular type of client, that kind of thing. What I say is, okay, put that on the left-hand side of your page. $1,500 is make sure I cover my cost and get a profit, okay? But now I want to look at Scott, who doesn't know how to do, let's turn it around. Let's say you're offering the service. I can't talk about you this way, but I can talk about me this way. You're offering me this service, and you know it. You want minimum you want to make $1,500. You look at me now. If I were going to try and do what you can do for me, because you're an expert, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to do it wrong. I'm going to spend a lot of money on training. I'm going to take a lot longer than I should take, and I'm probably going to miss the mark a little bit. All those things. So let's add up what that costs me. If my hourly rate's $1,000 an hour, and I'm going to spend 5 days on it, and I'm going to get it wrong, and I'm going to go to 6 training courses, and I'm not going to ever actually pull the plug, you're costing me, $80,000. Or I'm costing myself $80,000 to not do it, right? So if it's something I've determined I need to do, which is the only people I want to serve, and I assume you're the same way, right? I've now got this range, $1,500 to $80,000. Now, you're not going to charge $80,000 because I might as well do it myself if you're going to charge $80,000. But know that that's your range. Then go look at what your competition is charging and decide where you want to fall. But don't price to your competition and don't price to that minimum amount because you are special in what you're offering. The thing is, you don't want to, you're special in what you're offering, and it's the value of what you offer, not the cost that it takes you to produce it. So that's kind of I have a graphic of that basically shows a crazy entrepreneur going all over the place and never hitting the mark. You can walk in and say, hey, say it's $5,000 even, right? I'm going to charge you $5,000. We'll get you there in 5 minutes to exactly the right spot.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I think, you always want to place price in the context of value and never the other way around. And yet so many will effectively price shop, and I think they do it because that's how we also go ahead and buy. And so you walk in even as a seller with your, if you will, buyer's brain on, and as a consequence you're thinking, okay, what is the frame? And that frame is, okay, a lowest price. But you often come into it, I think, as a seller, even with a high value service, product, or some combination thereof, with a misunderstood frame as to what it is that those that you're helping, just in the story you've described, what is the value proposition to them? And instead, even if you charged in your example, I don't know, 5, 10, 15, but you had a 5x return, assuming, of course, your buyer would believe the 5x, that there was on their part, they had that belief system that they could do it and hadn't been disappointed in the past elsewhere.
Yeah. And truthfully, the way I kind of think about this, and I didn't come to this conclusion by brilliant insight. I came to this conclusion by making a million mistakes. And I very early on, I think like most of it, would price down to that client. Like, oh, they're not going to buy. So instead of 5, I'm going to say 3,000.
Yep.
I can tell you that without exception, those are the biggest pain in the ass clients I've ever had. And now after almost 10 years in the business, I actually do the opposite, and I charge a PIA supplemental fee. So if I pick up that someone's doing that, I give them a higher price. Because if I'm going to get them, I want to feel like it's worth it. And if I don't get them, I don't care. And that took me a long time to get to, because everybody always said that. And I'm like, sure, easy for you to say, you don't need money in the bank. But the truth of the matter was, I found that money in the bank was not worth the sometimes years of pain and suffering that went along with it. And since I've stopped doing that, a couple things have happened. I think my confidence level's different, because I know I'm not going to go down that road now. So people oddly are attracted to confidence. I'm not doing it on purpose. I just am confident. I don't want you if you're not the kind of client I can help, right? Because you're going to be upset. I'm going to be upset. But that confidence comes across, and all of a sudden, it's a much easier sales process because you're not selling. And you once you know that what you offer is of that value, there's a sort of magic to it. And I never had a better day than when I literally cleaned my portfolio of clients out of the folks who just made me crazy. And they keep track of pennies, and all the things. They have to see evidence that makes no sense. Like, you've provided them a solution and the value, and they're like, well, how did you do that? I need to see it's like in math. I need to see your work. Like, you're not going to see my work, So, but a little bit of it comes down to, in the story of the pricing at 5,000 or 80,000. I'm sure you've heard this. The air conditioner's broken, and the technician comes and looks at it a minute and then bangs it, and it starts working, and he says that'll be $5,000. And I'm like, well, you took 5 seconds. He goes, yeah, but I knew where to hit it.
Yeah, and I spent 30 years knowing exactly where to hit it, and at the right speed, and at the right velocity, with the correct tools. And you're getting the benefit of that literally in 5 seconds, so that you're getting that result now, and not a week from now when I finally figured out exactly what to do. So
bingo. You nailed it. That's my answer to the pricing question for not commodities. Commodities, that's a different game. It's a whole different game. But
yeah, no, it is true. I think people just misunderstand and don't either feel they can establish or figure out what that value is, or that value-based selling, if you will, or that it's just too complicated, or there's just simply too much pressure that they feel, or there, of course, could be some sort of perhaps a confidence issue or something of that nature.
And I would also say, Scott, on the commodity side, you're not always, if you don't want to be a commodity, but that's what you offer, you can start to add things to that to separate you from the masses in their pricing. So I don't mean to imply that if you're a commodity, you're stuck forever. There are really good business ways to say, okay, yeah, this is a commodity. How do I make it different? Especially now, do I make my brewery? I happen to love beer, right? So my favorite brewery is right down the street. And he's a brewery, and he's got a bar, and he's like, there are a million breweries now. How do I don't want to bring my prices down. So he's starting to make it an event location now. Yep. So there's Thursday trivia, there's Friday band, there's Saturday taco truck, there's races and different kinds of things. So it's really you're not stuck in commodity land ever. I would say if you feel like you are, put yourself through an exercise to say, how can I differentiate? What really matters to the people who buy this stuff that they've never mentioned before?
Yeah, no, I think, oftentimes you can be a huge catalyst for yourself by thinking, laterally or vertically. There's obviously a lot of different exercises out there for doing so, and just understand what it is about, in the case of the brewery, somebody, what is it, a single person, or maybe it's a couple, or it's a family? What is it that is truly bringing them emotionally to that particular venue at that time, and build other activities, other opportunities really about around it and on top of it. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's always there's always some way to escape the commodity trap if you want to. It takes, like we were saying earlier, it takes some different thinking and a lot of work. It's not easy out there. I've told you before, like I have tried in 10 years every way of advertising on Facebook, and I just have not landed that damn plane.
Yeah.
So
no, it's true. Those platforms can be a huge boon, but they can also be quite vexing and frustrating, and then expensive as well, depending on what you're trying to accomplish and how quickly you want to accelerate what you think will be a success, but ends up being sometimes a lot more frustrating. So
I swear, if I had even just a dime for every dollar I've spent with no return on that, I would retire. No, I wouldn't, but I could. I could.
Yep. No, I can imagine. I'm sure you'd have a lot of company as well. Before we go ahead and take a break, what is, from a financial processes standpoint, should a $1 million company that is, wanting to scale to say 5 million and beyond, but let's say it's between where they are as where they want to be in say 2 or 3 years is at 5 million. It could be SaaS. It could be obviously any number of them. In terms of financial processes, what do you think should be?
To have written a book about that very topic.
Yes, you have.
So there's a lot, and to highlight it before we take a break is you have to go back to the old "what got you here won't get you there." That's the summary version, and we can detail that a little bit after the break. But there are things in 5 different areas of your business where you have to change from a founder mentality to a scaling CEO. And it's tough love, but it's real. And you are not going to get to $5 million. And I'm sure there's an exception, and I'm sure the exception will drop their comments in the podcast. But we'll just do away with the outliers right now. You're not going to muscle yourself to a $5 million business and be happy, rested, and have good relationships. Period. And so there's some tweaks you can make in these areas that get a little less daunting when you break them down to exactly what you have to do to change. And a lot of it's really not as hard as it feels before you break it down into its pieces. There's really simple steps to take, which we can dive into after the break. I can kind of give you 1 or 2 from each of the sort of categories.
Yeah, no, we could go ahead and do that. Yeah, I think just, for many, unless they happen to have, 2 large contracts that got them to $1 million, particularly here I live outside of DC, so there are federal contracts where you could be easily in 7 figures on a single contract, let alone, just a few. And so to move from that even to 2 million is okay. You can handle that with, outsourced talent or whatever the combination might be.
That's when you'll start to feel the tension.
But you start to feel the tension and you just get squeezed in a lot of different ways. Whereas at 5 million, I don't care. If you have 10 contracts and they require that, a certain measure of oversight, that ends up being just a much more challenging thing to manage, where everything centers around yourself, or where you feel as though it does because everything just runs through you, even if you have other staff members. So I always like to ask it because I think a lot of it's stuck.
What's harder, to grow from 0 to $1 million, or to grow from $1 million to 5 million, or 5 million to 10 million? And with the right transitions of you personally in the role as founder, then CEO, and then quite frankly board member at one point, then it gets easier each time. Without it, it gets harder each time. So it's really good to just know going in, hey, there's a few things I want to have in place that are going to make my life so much easier. And the extent to which, I love seeing the relief come across people's faces, because like everything, Scott, when you hear I have to do, these things, you're like, oh God, that mountain's high. I can't do that. There's no way I can do that. My hairdresser, I'm going to give you an example. My hairdresser recently had to fire his manager. Okay, his manager had been failing at the job for 1.5 years. They'd had him on a performance plan for 6 months. They weren't performing. They were cancer in the organization. I could see it. His coach could see it. Everybody could see it. He saw firing that person as like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in 5 minutes. And I just saw him for the first time after he'd done the deed. And I looked at him and I said, oh my God, you look like a different person. And he's like, I cannot describe how right everyone was, number one, and number two, how much I didn't see it. And we can't believe it. until like we've done it, and then we look back and go, that wasn't that hard. I said, when did it stop? When did the pressure stop? He goes, the minute I was in front of them and opened my mouth. I said, that's right. It's like somebody pops a pin in that pressure. It's like, it's done. And it had all been anticipation until then. So like he chose to do it the hard way, but sometimes that's the only way we can choose, because we don't know until we do it ourselves.
Yeah, no, it's so true in our lives in lots of different ways. It ends up being creating quite a monster, and then either you pop the balloon or you just learn how to choose differently, as opposed to trying and change from a point of view of lack or limitation, or I am not yet this person to be that company CEO at a $5 million mark or whatever it might be. And the monsters we can create are quite spectacular.
We definitely can.
Yeah. Well, why don't we go ahead and take a short break, and we will be right back. Purple Finch Group helps technology CEOs innovating at the edge of chaos create operational fitness across their technology stack and team of talent. Achieving significant and measurable scale, selling your story, and finding time to think and plan can feel like a bridge too far. So if you're a CEO whose company has found product market fit, but is struggling, or you're a CEO whose company is looking to accelerate existing momentum, we can help with proven blueprints for optimal scale. Shifting from incremental addition to exponential multiplication can be absolutely achieved with less effort and stress. To get in touch, I can be reached at Scott with 2 T's at purplefinchgroup.com. Now, back to the interview. So we are back with Pam Prior, and to kind of continue with where we were just before the break around financial processes and 1 million to 5 million. Pam, can you, from the book that you've written and as a bestseller, can you highlight a couple of points that I think would be relevant here to the topic beforehand? That way they've got a bit of a taste as to what they should look for, be thinking about, and then a little bit about the book would be cool too, because I have a copy and have obviously read it and marked it up with yellow marker. So yeah,
awesome. I got my best compliment of this book. So one of my clients actually said, I keep your book by my side and I can see us working through it in the business, and I read something that we missed. Like, oh my God! So you often I forget what I write sometimes. So like, oh my God, you're right. We got to do that. So there's a one that's kind of a pain in the neck logistically, but can buy you so much freedom in the end that it's absolutely worth the investment. And that is, I call it structure. And I don't mean structure of your organization. We're going to talk about that under people. But structure of your relationships outside of the organization. So for example, if you're a partnership, making sure that partnership agreement is in place and that you all fully understand how it works. I have seen the best of friends and family have horror at the end of a business because they disagreed on what the partnership really was meant to be. With your clients, go ahead and have a contract, especially if you're getting ready to exit. Go ahead and have contracts in place with each of your clients, because then that's something that is both sellable if they want to move, but it also proves that this business is able to contract things. So all of those sorts of things you really want to have in place, and I call that the structure piece. And it's a pain in the neck, but get yourself a VA, probably use ChatGPT to do a lot of it now, and just get that stuff done. Get yourself a contracts database and make sure that everybody's clear on how this thing is set up and how it works, especially if you have some complex levels and multiple companies and that kind of thing. So that's one of the things. The hardest one is the people one, okay? And the people one is, well, I'm not going to say it's the hardest. One of the hardest ones is the people one. A lot of times as founders, we've had a lot of people who have done great work for us to help us get this thing off the ground. They've been loyal, they've been faithful, they've done everything from take out the garbage to scrub the toilet to, come to the meetings with people who are asking for funding. And you don't want to let these people go. Or you have a family member you're helping out who's doing the books for you or doing your marketing or whatever it might be. Those relationships that a founder has, when it's time for a founder to change into a CEO, they have to recognize that they have to put the emotional aspects of those relationships aside. Now, what I don't mean is you have to not care. What I do mean is you want to look at each of the positions in your organization and say, is the right person in the right seat? And if, there's two different situations that I think tend to arise here. Joe Loyal has stood with me through thick and thin, and because of that, I have him as my vice president of marketing. And the marketing team can't stand him. He doesn't know what he's doing. He hasn't kept up with current technology. But damn it, he's been loyal to me. So, fine. Look at your organization, start with a white piece of paper, and figure out where Joe Loyal's skills best fit. One of two things is going to happen. You're going to find that spot, you're going to move him, and totally fix the problem. Or you're not, and you can help him find the next thing. Because what I have found is when you come to that point, it's better for them too. They know they suck at what they're doing.
Yes, they do.
They hate it. They come to work every day feeling like they can't achieve what they need to achieve. You can do all sorts of things. You can give them a bonus for everything they've done for you forever, a severance or whatever. You can introduce them to people that do suit their skill set.
Yep.
But it's time. You're a grown-up CEO now, not a founder, and it's time to make those tough decisions. For things like, Mom's my bookkeeper, but my bookkeeping just isn't getting done, or I have no idea what it's saying, and she's using, an old desktop version of QuickBooks that, kind of got antiquated 20 years ago, but we're allowed to talk about it as antiquated now, and refuses to move to where, the world is on the cloud. What I want you to do there is remember it's your mom, and they've done more than Loyal Joe has done for you your whole life, potentially.
Yep.
But recognize that they don't fit in the business. If you've decided you're going to support your mom, totally fine. Support her. But don't do it so that she's blocking something in the business. A great bookkeeper who works right underneath her and knows how to get things done. Outsourcing that. If it's, in marketing, somebody who's up to date on techniques and say, hey, Mom, you've earned your retirement. Go do it. I'm going to spend the same kind of money on you, maybe. You have the right to do that. You're the owner of that business. You can do whatever the heck you want. Call her a consultant and have her go home. But don't let her stand in the way of progress in your organization. And those are the things, like I was telling you about my hairdresser, although this person hadn't been loyal and wasn't a relative, but you get those situations too.
Yeah.
As if you're going to transition into the business owner that's going from 1 to 5, you not only have that responsibility to yourself, because you do, you deserve better, but you also have that responsibility to your clients, your vendors and suppliers, and your other employees, most of all. What you'll find 9 times out of 10 when this happens, and I've got a 33-year career of watching this and being part of it, is that person was more than just a problem to you. They were a cancer in the organization, and we're going to keep you where you were forever if you didn't do something about it. In one case, I had a client who's this guy, I'll leave his name aside, but he ended up costing him $250,000 because he shipped product to somebody who promised to pay him later, internationally, where we couldn't even sue to get the money back. And it's because he didn't know. He didn't know. It's not his fault in that he was put in a position he could never have succeeded at.
Yeah. No, it is really true, and it's surprisingly common as well. I mean, earlier in my career, I worked for a small family organization, husband and wife team with kids and other stuff like that. That ended up being quite a bit more complicated than my role at Raytheon. And on top of that, you get, we tend to think of ourselves here in the States, but in the West in general, as being, very professional in many ways. We are very contractually oriented. But in many other jurisdictions around the world where, family, the village, the culture, your religion, all of those trump other sorts of criteria because it's about trust fundamentally. And so you get trust, but you also get locked into situations where your Uncle Joe's a great guy, but, you don't want him the head of logistics. I mean, he can't even keep, his own car well maintained. So it's just a variety of challenges where you do experience, or if you experience growth, it's not always as easy or as cut and dry as it would appear to be, at least on the front cover of the Wall Street Journal or something like that. So I think in the weeds. is
It
it's
is
really
one of those
important.
things. I often talk about the fact that whenever we have a door that's closed and we know there's something behind it, we always think it's a tiger. 9 times out of 10, when I say 9 times out of 10, that's a habit of speech I need to get rid of. But more often than not, when we open that door, it's a kitty cat, or there's an obvious answer. And I've seen it happen so many times in so many different situations that I know it's true. You just have to, as the business owner, step in and go, okay, yeah, he doesn't fit there. Now, once you get through past that step, it's huge, because you're not saying he's a jerk or I'm going to screw him. You're not saying any of that. All you're saying is Joe doesn't belong there. Mom doesn't belong there. Okay, now what do we do to take care of that in whatever your humane, wonderful way is to do that? And it always shows up. It always shows up.
Yeah, because other people notice it too. I mean, other people in the organization,
God.
as well as family, friends, because of those connections, that radiates very, very quickly. And
My
so I
hairdresser,
think,
just as an example, because this just happened last week, which is why I'm telling the story. He has probably 35 people working at that salon. He found out after he fired her, and because they all just assumed he liked her because he left her there. Him, them, him, her. I was changing the gender so that you can't guess. He left them there, and the minute it was over, 7 of the 35 people came up and said, I was going to quit within a month. I was going to quit. And that's great talent that almost drained out the door because of this. So
yeah, so it's...
So the one other place I do want to touch on, Scott, really quick,
Sure.
do we have a second?
We do. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, because the other big place, and entrepreneurs always go, myself included when I say this, but it has to do with process. Okay? What I want you to do as an entrepreneur is equate process to freedom. Okay? We often say, hey, I'm doing this because I want freedom. I don't want to have rules. I don't want to follow guidelines. I want to do my own thing, right? That's part of the wonder and glory of entrepreneurship.
Indeed.
But what happens at this pivot point when you're going from $1 million to $5 million is every process you put in place gives you one less thing you have to do, gives you one more step of freedom. So sure, maybe you have to take pictures of your receipts. But doing that, all of a sudden, you can answer a question that might have taken you 2 days to dig all the data up for down the road. You can answer it in 5 seconds because you can pull up your phone and go, oh, yeah, that's what our sales were last year. That's what our expenses were last year. This is my profitability by line of business. This is how much that client I make on that client. So every time we talk about putting processes in place, I really make sure that the owner I'm working with knows that that's a part of the plan. And that if I'm going to work with them, that's part of the plan. Because that transition is miraculous. But there is no way to see it when you first go in and see somebody say, we're going to draw some processes on paper and get them documented. Because it sucks documenting. But once it's done, the freedom is absolutely exponential.
Yeah, no, documentation is not the most sexy, shall we say, for
And
most of us.
doesn't have to mean. Let me tell you one other thing. Documentation is not what it used to be. Like, I worked in corporate in the 90s, and documentation was typing technical documents until your eyes were spinning. Documentation now, turn on a camera on your screen, click a few buttons, save it, and boom, you've got a process documented.
Yeah.
If you want to put the Visio diagram in place and all of that, you can absolutely do that. And some clients want that. Other clients just want to know that the people in their business, really what it comes down to, all it comes down to, the process comes down to, is if I'm doing something, I want to know what the person who's handing it to me to do something with it does to get it to me. So I want to understand the step before me in the process, and I want to understand what the person at the next step is doing with it. Because if I know those two things, and everybody in the chain knows those two things, can't go wrong. That's really all it is making sure everybody's connected to the person they're getting or giving something to, from, or to.
Yep. No, very, very, very sensible advice, and to reframe it as freedom is valuable too. I'll have to start doing that for myself as well. I'm usually quite good at the documentation and just being organized, but I will say it does bog me down every once in a while, and I'll reframe it as current and future freedom. That's a nice one. So
that's the key. Yeah, and if you're doing a process that's not going to lead to freedom, doesn't need to be done.
Yeah, good point. Yeah,
So
I'll have to be cognizant of that going forward. One further question on the finance side is for whether they're bootstrapped or whether they are funded is when should a founder, CEO go ahead and hire a CFO like yourself, either on a full or fractional basis, and how to go ahead and prioritize that role relative to another C-level role, or how do you think about that? Because I'm sure you've had that conversation many times thus far.
I actually wrote my first book about that. Not to pitch my books, I'm not here to do that, but there's a book called Your First CFO, which focuses on that very question but I can put it, if I'm going to jump to the very end and put it in one sentence, I'll say it's when you're feeling alone in the foxhole. Okay? As business owners, we can't necessarily always talk to our spouses or partners about what's going on in any level of detail. We can't talk to our employees about everything that's going on in our heads because owners and employees are very different people. Yep. We can't necessarily even talk to our peers, although there are some good peer groups. They're not going to understand our unique situation. So usually the short answer, and then I'll dive in a little bit more, but the short answer is if you've gotten to a decision-making point in your business where you feel alone in the foxhole and you're like, I just need somebody in here who will help me be there when I need them and understand all of the pieces I'm dealing with and have my back around what's important to me in my business. It's always financial, and that's when you need a CFO. Now, backing off from that a little bit, there are levels of financial support you can get, and there are a bazillion different names of all the different finance people you can hire, right? But for most entrepreneurs, I'll break it into 4, maybe 5, depending on how I get on a roll here. But the first is just a bookkeeper. So let's talk about what a bookkeeper does. A bookkeeper literally is just taking the data from your banking credit cards, running it through a mapping table, and giving you sensible reports that put your story in context. They tell you over time, here's how your money's been spent and earned, and compared to what you thought would happen, here's how your money's been spent and earned. That's all a bookkeeper's doing. They're just taking that money through the system for you. The next level up is what you call an accountant or an analyst. That's the person who's going to say to you, hey, we should probably build a forecast. Because, we can see what our money's doing over time here, and we can kind of know what we're expecting and whether it's meeting what we expect or not. But now let's take that data. We know our story and how we run our business. We know these are our 8 levers. Let's tie these 8 levers to that information. And now we can forecast. What happens if I pull that lever? What happens if I pull these 2 levers? What happens if I don't do anything? And an analyst an accountant gets to the point where they can create that forecast for you so that you can say, hey, here's what I think is going to happen. And then you can compare very specifically, that didn't happen. I thought, I was going to raise my price and I'd have this much in sales. Well, shoot, I only had $10,000 less than that in sales. What happened? Only one of 2 things could have happened, right? There's only 2 levers there, quantity and price, right? So now you know, if I want more quantity, I have to bring my price down. If I want a higher price, I have to expect lower quantity. And then you can start to play with those variables a little bit. So they connect that string from information to your story. They're the connector for you, that accountant, that analyst. As you get a little bigger or have more complex financials, you probably want a controller. And a controller is exactly what the title says. They're controlling and protecting your assets. So they're making sure that everything you have is in the right places, that it's spent the way you think it's being spent, and that it's, nobody's going to run off with it, and you're not going to do anything crazily stupid with it. That's the controller. The CFO takes it a step beyond that. They're not just there to protect your assets, they're there to work strategically with you to grow your wealth. And any CFO you get if you're an entrepreneur, any CFO you get should be focused on that as the context for what they're doing in your business. Because you may be building a business for a lifestyle. That's going to be a very different requirement of a CFO than if you're building a business to sell so that you can live on passive income from licensing rights forever, or you want to become a franchise, or you just want to sell it and get out. You really need for that CFO to understand why you're doing this, what you want from it, and then help you build all the pieces around it to make sure that happens. From banking to funding to insurance to your finance team to anything that kind of interacts with the value you're going to get out of that business, not just financially, but emotionally and towards your personal private goals in addition to just the financial ones.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. I mean, I always thought of the CFO role as being a very strategic role unless you dragged somebody into other things. I didn't know or hadn't really drawn the distinction between that and the controller, and then potentially, obviously, the accountant and or CPA as to how those layer over and stuff. But that all makes makes
so the
perfect
CPAs,
sense.
any of those roles could be a CPA, likely your controller, sometimes your CFO. CPA is the one you want doing your taxes. That's the real drive. You want to make sure that at least it's owned by a CPA if you're having them do taxes. And I've got a whole nother, I know we're running out of time here, but I've got a whole nother tirade to go on about how important it is to manage your wealth.
Nope, and that is fair. I will have you on the show again. We can talk
Awesome.
about.
I look forward
we
to
can
it.
rail on. We can have it a free flow rail on experience or so.
Beautiful.
What I'll do is shift gears a little bit here because I always like to talk with my guests about stuff that they enjoy, either in their particularly in their professional life. And I know you enjoy your work. We've obviously talked about that offline and in different ways. What do you most enjoy about being CFO or a CFO, and helping entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so I think the thing I enjoy most is that I've determined and agree that all entrepreneurs are crazy. Because they're all different kind of crazy, right? Myself included. Mm-hmm. And what I really like is, what I enjoy is running alongside an entrepreneur for a while to feel and learn what their momentum is and what they're out there to do. And learning what they're out there to do and then taking everything I know and figuring out the best way to structure it to support them without breaking their momentum. So that puzzle for me is a huge chunk of the fun. And then just the relationship that you get with each of those entrepreneurs when you're working with the ones that are suited for you. It becomes a really symbiotic, I think is the right word, relationship, and fluid. And it's that kind of relationship's always been fulfilling to me. When I was in corporate, I tried to have that relationship both with whoever I was reporting to and my teams. And that work and flow and relationship is a big part of it. And the other thing is I have fun at work. I just love having fun. So I started in a mailroom and I had fun in the mailroom. I've been in the boardroom, under the hood of a truck. Wherever it is, I'm going to have fun. So this I'm having fun at as well for some of the reasons I just mentioned. But I also love rolling up my sleeves, doing some bookkeeping and an analysis in a spreadsheet every now and then. And what's really fun now is AI. I'm learning every single day I probably know 1/1,000,000% of what you can do with AI, and yet it's changed my life and it's changed my ability to serve my clients too. So that's a lot of fun. There's always something on the new horizon.
Yeah, no, it's true, and what you've shared resonates with me personally and professionally too. It's the relationship and the connection to clients and not just helping them, but kind of really shifting where they're looking at and why they're looking in the way that they have been for, in some cases, a very, very long period of time, just because they weren't aware of yet something else or a different way of looking at what the possibilities
they could trust to point it out to them. Like everybody's got an agenda for an entrepreneur, and the cool thing about and maybe that's what it is, that when Friend in the Foxhole is, another way to put that is if you need somebody who doesn't have an agenda for your outcome, that's when you need a CFO. If everybody else has got an agenda, you look around and you're like, crap, where do I get the just for me feedback? That's when you need the right CFO.
Yep. Nope, that is fair. Well, the last question I always want to ask a guest is if someone wishes to reach out to you, what would be the best way to do that?
So I am everywhere on social media as at Pam S. Prior. LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. So that's number one, and you can always DM me in any of those spots. But I also have a website that is pamprior.com, and there's a contact form there you can reach me with, or you can ask Scott, and he'll hook you up directly with me.
And I can do that. I can do that as well. That is.
I sometimes like that for that personal touch better than all those other things anyway.
Yeah, no, warm intro is a valuable thing. There's no, I think no better introduction than to receive a warm intro from someone who you happen to like, or if at least in some way, shape, or form it does.
Yeah, because we know each other's personalities and who will work well together and who might not, kind of jive. So yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, cool. Well, Pam, thank you very much for carving out time to chat with us here on the Disciplined Troublemakers. I know for the audience, both those who are going to listen and obviously watch as this gets popped up to YouTube, the lots of really helpful information for each and every one of them. And folks, we will be back with another episode very soon. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you for tuning into the Disciplined Troublemakers podcast, and we hope you found the episode valuable. If you did, please subscribe to the Disciplined Troublemakers podcast on your favorite platform and leave a review. Putting this podcast together is a group effort, so I'd like to provide a shout out to Heartcast Media and their team for all of the assistance they provide with each episode. If you want to get in touch with me directly, I can be reached at Scott with 2 T's at purplefinchgroup.com. Purple Finch Group is the sponsor of this podcast. We have another podcast episode out very shortly. Stay tuned.